We continue Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. I think I'll look that up, or I might not be saying it that way, right? We can only trace the rest of his opinions from his philosophy, which we have said in the general to be Platonic, though it cannot also be denied that there was a tincture of it in the eclectic sect. He means eclectic, as it's more usually called, which was begun by Ptolemon under the empire of Augustus, and which selected from all the other sects what seemed most probable in their opinions, not adhering singularly to any of them, nor rejecting everything. I will only touch his belief of spirits in his two treatises of oracles, the one concerning the reason of their cessation, the other inquiring why they were not given in verse as in former times. He seems to assert that the Pythagorean doctrine of transmigration of souls, which you actually find the Greeks believed in reincarnation or transmigration or whatever you want to call it, same thing really. It's not reincarnation, it's transmigration. Okay, they had it before the Hindus as far as writing about it. Hindus, I mean, in the race of people. There's not really a Hindu religion, that's a misnomer, but we have formally shown that he owned the unity of a Godhead, whom, according to his attributes, he calls by several names, as Jupiter from his almighty power, Apollo from his wisdom, and so of the rest. But under him he places those beings whom he styles genii or daemons of a middle nature, and between divine and human, for he thinks it absurd that there should be no mean between the two extremes of an immortal and a mortal being, that there cannot be in nature so vast a flaw without some intermediate kind of life, partaking of them both. And remember, the Chura Nefra, I think they were called. There was a Californian sect that basically all these god names were the same god. We just know through different masks. And basically they were doing the same thing with the ancient Egyptian stuff that you see done in the monotheist traditions. Like, yeah, we're using these names, but we're not personifying it. There's no extra deity. The Natura Nefer cult was okay with personifying deity. Hence the masks were not only names, but the masks were acceptable masks, right? As, therefore, we find the intercourse between the soul and body to be made by the animal spirits, so between divinity and humanity there is this species of daemons who, having first been men and followed the strict rules of virtue, have purged off the grossness and feculency of their earthly being, are exalted into these genii, and are from thence either raised higher into an ethereal life, if they still continue virtuous, or tumbled down again into mortal bodies, and sinking into flesh after they have lost that purity which constituted their glorious being. And he means, as in who, I believe, those who, apparently the word and should be omitted in line 24 before sinking into flesh. Okay. And this sort of genii are those who, as our author imagines, presided over oracles, spirits which, having so much of their terrestrial principles remaining in them as to be subject to passions and inclinations, usually beneficent, sometimes malevolent to mankind. So, jinn, obviously. According as they refine themselves are gathered dross, and are declining into mortal bodies, the cessation, or rather the decrease of oracles, for some of them were still remaining in Plutarch's time, he attributes either to the death of those Damans, as appears by the story of the Egyptian Thamus, who was commanded to declare that the Greek god Pan was dead, or to their forsaking of those places where they formerly gave out their oracles, from whence they were driven by strong genii into banishment for a certain revolution of ages. Of this last nature were the war of the giants against the so-called gods, the dispossession of Saturn by Jupiter, the banishment of Apollo from heaven, the fall of Vulcan, and many others, all which, according to our author, were the battles of these genii or daemons amongst themselves, but supposing, as Plutarch evidently does, that these spirits administered under the Supreme Being the affairs of men, taking care of the virtuous, punishing the bad, and sometimes communicating with the best, as particularly the genius of Socrates, always warned him of approaching dangers and taught him to avoid them, I cannot but wonder that every one who has hitherto written Plutarch's life, and particularly Rualdus, the most knowing of them all, should so competently affirm that these oracles were given by bad spirits according to Plutarch. As Christians, indeed, we may think them so, but that Plutarch so thought is a most apparent falsehood. 'Tis enough to convince a reasonable man that our author in his old age, and that he doted not, we may see by the treatise he has written that old men ought to have the management of public affairs. I say that then he initiated himself in the sacred rites of Delphos and died. For aught we know, Apollo's priest. Now it is not to be imagined that he thought the god he served a Cacodamon, or as we call him, a devil. Nothing could be further from the opinion and practice of this holy philosopher than so gross an impiety. And, of course, the word witch refers to people who know or intend to be working with those beings on their side, that sort of stuff. Or they're casting their spells and some being comes in and takes advantage, right? The story of the Pythias, a priest of Apollo, which he relates immediately before the ending of the treatise concerning the cessation of oracles, confirms my assertion rather than shakes it. For 'tis there delivered that going with great reluctation into the sacred place to be inspired, she came out foaming at the mouth, her eyes goggling, her breast heaving, her voice undistinguishable and shrill, as if she had an earthquake within her, laboring for vent, and, in short, that thus tormented with the God whom she was not able to support, she died distracted in a few days after. And the margin here means I already shared that. For he had said before that the divineress ought to have no perturbations of mind or impure passions at the time when she was to consult the oracle, and if she had, she was no more fit to be inspired than an instrument untuned to render an harmonious sound. And he gives us suspect by what he says at the close of this relation, that this Pythias had not lived chastely for some time before it, so that her death appears more like a punishment inflicted for loose living by some holy power than the mere malignancy of a spirit delighted naturally in mischief. There is another observation which indeed comes nearer to their purpose, which I will digress so far as to relate, because it is somewhat appertains to our own country. There are many islands, says he, which lie scattered about Britain, after the manner of our Sporydus. They are unpeopled, and some of them are called islands of the heroes, or the genii. One, Demetrius, was sent by the emperor, who, by the computation of the time, must either be Caligula or Claudius, to discover those parts, and arriving at one of the islands next adjoining to the before mentioned, which was inhabited by some few Britons, but these held as sacred and inviolable to all their countrymen. Immediately after his arrival, the air grew black and troubled. Strange apparitions were seen. The winds raised a tempest, and fiery spouts or whirlwinds appeared, dancing towards the earth. Caligula Claudius was probably later. When these prodigies were ceased, the islanders informed him that some one of the aerial beings, superior to our nature, then ceased to live, for as a taper, while yet burning, affords a pleasant, harmless light, but is noisome and offensive when extinguished, so those heroes shine benignly on us and do us good, but at their death turn all things topsy-turvy, raise up tempests, and infect the air with pestilential vapors. By those holy and inviolable men, there is no question but he means our Druids, who were nearest to the Pythagoreans of any sect, and this opinion of the genii might probably be one of theirs. Yet it proves not that all demons were thus malicious, only those who were to be condemned hereafter into human bodies for their misdemeanors in their aerial being. But 'tis time to leave a subject so fanciful and so little reasonable as this. I am apt to imagine the natural vapors arising in the cave where the temple afterwards was built might work upon the spirits of those who entered the holy place, as they did on the shepherd Cortus, who first found it out by accident, and inclined them to enthusiasm and prophetic madness, that, as the strength of those vapors diminished, which were generally in caverns, as that of Mopsus, of Trophonius, and this of Delphos, so the inspiration decreased by the same measures that they happened to be stronger when they killed the Pythias, who, being conscious of this, was so unwilling to enter, that the oracles ceased to be given in verse, when poets ceased to be the priests, and the genius Socrates, whom he confessed never to have seen, but only to have heard inwardly and unperceived by others, was no more than the strength of his imagination, or, to speak in the language of a Christian Platonist, his guardian angel. The concluding passage of the life may serve as a conclusion to this prefatory essay. It is as follows, and now, with the usual vanity of Dutch professors, I could load our author with the praises and commemorations of writers, for both ancient and modern have made honorable mention of him. But to cumber the pages with this kind of stuff were to raise a distrust in common readers that Plutarch wants them. Viraldus indeed has collected ample testimonies of them, but I will only recite the names of some and refer you to him for the particular quotations. He reckons Gellius, Eusebius, Himerius, the Sophister, Eunapius, Charillus of Alexandria, Theodoret, Agathias, Photius, and Xiphilian, patriarchs of Constantinople, Johannes, Serus Bariensis, the famous Petrarch, Petras, Victorius, and Justus Lipsius. But Theodorus Gaza, a man learned in the Latin tongue and a great restorer of the Greek, who lived about 200 years ago, deserves to have his suffrage set down in words at length. For the rest have only commended Plutarch more than any single author, but he has extolled him above all together. 'Tis said that, having this extravagant question put to him by a friend, that if learning must suffer a general shipwreck, and he had only his choice left him of preserving one author, who should be the man he would preserve, he answered, Plutarch, and probably might give this reason, that is, saving him, he should secure the best collection of them all. The epigram of Agathias deserves also to be remembered. This offer flourished about the year 500, in the reign of the Emperor Justinian. The verses are extant in the Anthologia, and with the translation of them I will conclude the praises of our author, having first admonished you that they are supposed to be written on a statue erected by the Romans to his memory. Chauronian Plutarch, to thy deathless praise does martial Rome this grateful statue raise, because both Greece and she thy fame have shared, their heroes written and their lives compared, but thou thyself couldst never write thy own. Their lives have parallels, but thine has none. And the French edition of August 1517, and there were later editions, Schaffer 1812 to 1818, Senatus, 1812 to 1830, 1839 to 1888, De Wetner, 1846 to 1855, Becker, 1855 to 57. It's been translated by Thomas North from James Amiot's French text, 1570. 79, 95, 1603, with additional lives, and later editions, 1676, being the last complete one, edited, introduced by George Windham, Tudor Translations, 1895. And W.H.D. Rouse, The Temple of Plutarch, 10 volumes. This is why you got 10 volumes. You can have over a 100-page book. 130-page book with each volume. That's selection for the illustration of Shakespeare's plays with notes, glossaries, etc. by W.W. Skeats, 1875, by several hands, with a life by Dryden. So, this is, edited and revised by Arthur Hugh Clough, 1864 and 1876. So this is obviously this is pre-79, but I don't remember what year it is. But this is a this is a reprint of the 1864 one.